On Monday morning, I walked into my 12th floor office and froze at the white box on my desk. Inside was the dress my husband had given me for our 35th wedding anniversary, beautiful enough to feel suspicious. But the sharp chemical scent made every instinct in me go still. I told my assistant, "No one touches it." Just then, my husband walked in and asked, "Will you wear it tonight?" I nodded, keeping my distance, unaware that the dress was only the beginning of something far worse waiting at tonight's dinner. Before I go any further, thank you for being here. It means the world to me. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from, your city, your country. I rate everyone. A small note. This story includes fictional elements crafted for entertainment and reflection. Any resemblance to specific names or places is coincidental, but the lesson inside it is one worth keeping. Monday, October 7th, 2024. 12th floor, Marlowe Capital Group, Greenwich Avenue, Greenwich, Connecticut. The box was waiting on the edge of my desk when I arrived that morning, and that was the first thing wrong with it. My assistant, Cora Blaine, had been with me for 11 years. She knew better than to place anything directly on my desk without telling me first. I found her at her station just outside my office, already watching me with the careful expression she reserved for things she was not certain about. "It was delivered by courier before 7, she said. "No company name on the envelope. The front desk signed for it." Cora was 43 years old, precise in everything she did, and loyal in the way some people simply are not out of obligation, but out of a genuine belief in how things should be done. She had turned down 2 better-paying positions in the years she had worked for me, and I had never once had to tell her something twice. "Thank you, Cora," I said. "Give me 20 minutes before the morning briefing." She nodded and closed the door without a sound. I set my coffee on the credenza away from the desk and looked at the box. It was white cardboard with a matte finish that caught the morning light off the harbor. The ribbon was black, tied in a clean, simple knot. There was a small card tucked beneath it. "For the woman who deserves to be celebrated, always yours, Fletcher." 35 years, and he still signed cards as though we had just met. I had long since stopped finding it charming. Beneath 2 layers of white tissue paper was a dress. Floor-length, long-sleeved silk charmeuse, in a red so deep it was almost the color of dried roses. It was without question one of the most beautiful garments I had seen in years, the kind of thing that required confidence to wear, the kind of thing a man chooses when he wants a woman to be seen. I lifted it carefully by the shoulders and held it at arm's length. That was when I smelled it. It was faint, barely there, and if I had simply shaken the dress out and hung it in my closet, I might have dismissed it as nothing. But I had spent the first years of my career in a building that shared ventilation with a dry cleaning operation 2 floors below, and I knew the particular sharpness of a chemical solvent, the way some people know the smell of rain. What I was detecting now was not a dry cleaning smell. It was something more concentrated, something that had no reason to be on a silk evening gown. I laid the dress back in the box and closed the lid. I did not yet have a name for what I had smelled. I did not yet know exactly what I was holding in my hands. What I had was 35 years of reading situations that did not add up, and every one of those years was telling me to be very still and very careful. The office door opened. Fletcher stepped in without knocking, a habit I had stopped addressing years ago because it was the smallest of his offenses. He was in his charcoal suit, the one he wore for board presentations. His cufflinks were silver, his tie was straight, and his smile was the particular smile of a man performing warmth rather than feeling it. I had learned to tell the difference a long time ago. "You found it," he said, glancing at the box on my desk. "It is beautiful," I said. I did not reach for the box. I did not reach for him. He crossed the room slowly and stood on the other side of the desk, his eyes moving from the box to my face and back again. "You will wear it Thursday night." He meant the anniversary dinner. 200 guests at the Delamar Greenwich Harbor. His idea, his planning, his guest list. I had assumed it was vanity. I was beginning to revise that assumption in ways I was not yet ready to name. "Of course," I said. He held my gaze 1 beat longer than was natural. Something moved behind his eyes, quick controlled the expression of a calculation finishing before the face could catch up. Then he smiled again, said, "I would look stunning," and left. I waited until I heard the elevator doors close at the far end of the hall. Then I picked up my desk phone and dialed Cora's extension. "Hold the briefing," I said, "and find me the number for Dr. Raymond Voss. He is a toxicologist I worked with on a contamination case several years ago. Tell him I need a private consultation about a chemical compound, today if possible. Tell him it is not a medical matter. Tell him it is a professional one." There was a pause on Cora's end, the pause of a woman who understood that something had changed even without knowing what. "I will reach him within the hour," she said. I set the phone down and looked at the white box sitting on the corner of my desk. 4 days until Thursday. 4 days until the Delamar. Until 200 people in formal dress, until Fletcher stood at the head of the room and raised a glass to 35 years of marriage. I looked at the box for a long moment. Then I opened my desk drawer and took out a pair of latex gloves I kept for handling documents that required careful preservation. I put them on slowly, one finger at a time. I was still deciding what to do when Cora's voice came through the intercom, quieter than usual. "Mrs. Marlowe, there is a man in the lobby asking to speak with you. He says he used to work here. He says it is urgent." A brief pause. "His name is Stuart Finch." Cora brought him up herself rather than sending him through reception, which told me she had already decided he was worth my time. Stuart Finch looked like a man who had not slept since Thursday. He was 61 years old, slight in the way of someone who had always been too focused on work to eat regularly, with a narrow face and the eyes of a person who had recently seen something he could not unsee. He had worked in the accounting division of Marlowe Capital for 19 years. 2 weeks ago, Fletcher had called him into his office at 4 in the afternoon and handed him a termination letter without explanation. I gestured to the chair across from me in the small ground-floor conference room. He sat down and set a manila envelope on the table between us without preamble. "I did not go to the SEC," he said. "I thought about it. I picked up the phone twice. But that process takes months, sometimes longer, and you have a dinner on Thursday night." He paused. "I think you need to know what I know before Thursday." I looked at the envelope but did not touch it. "Tell me what you know, Stuart." He told me. Over the course of the next 40 minutes, Stuart Finch laid out what he had spent the past 6 months quietly documenting. 47 individual wire transfers, each one small enough to avoid triggering the automatic compliance flags built into our system, each one routed through a series of intermediary accounts before landing in a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands under the name Stonehaven Asset Holdings Limited. The total, when added across all 47 transactions, came to just under $52 million. The money had come from the Employee Pension Reserve, the fund our company had maintained for over 2 decades to protect the retirement accounts of more than 300 staff members. Fletcher, as Chief Financial Officer, had sole authorization to approve internal transfers below a certain threshold. He had exploited that authorization methodically over 4 years in amounts that individually would not raise a flag. Collectively, they had hollowed out the fund to a fraction of what it should have held. Inside the manila envelope was a USB drive containing copies of every transaction record, every approval signature, and a spreadsheet Stuart had built himself, cross-referencing the transfers against the official reports submitted to the board reports that showed the fund in healthy standing. "He altered the reporting figures," Stuart said quietly. "The board has been looking at numbers that do not reflect reality. They have no idea." I held the drive in my hand for a moment. In the United States, employees who report corporate financial fraud are protected under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, a federal law passed in 2002 that shields whistleblowers from retaliation and grants them legal standing when they bring evidence of fraud to the appropriate authorities. Stuart had put himself at significant personal risk by compiling this documentation, and he had come to me first rather than to a regulator. That decision told me something important about why he was here. "Why Thursday?" I said. He folded his hands on the table. 3 weeks before he fired me, I was working late on a quarterly reconciliation. It was past 8 in the evening. I did not realize Mr. Marlowe was still in the building. His office is at the far end of the floor, and I heard him through the wall, not clearly but enough. He was on the phone. Stuart paused. He said, and I am giving you the exact words because I wrote them down the moment I heard them, "Thursday is the right time. Make sure the formulation accounts for her condition." The room was very still. "I did not understand it then," Stuart continued. "I thought perhaps he was discussing a product or a client matter. But after the termination, after I began pulling the transfer records, I kept coming back to it. Her condition. He said her condition." He looked at me steadily. "You have a heart condition, Mrs. Marlowe. Everyone in this building who has worked here long enough knows that. It was in the company wellness disclosure you filed 3 years ago. I had been diagnosed with a cardiac arrhythmia, an irregular heartbeat, 18 months after my 50th birthday. It was managed, monitored, and largely unremarkable in daily life. But it meant that certain substances, certain stresses on the cardiovascular system could pose risks that would not apply to someone without the condition. A doctor would know this. A pharmacist would know this. Apparently so did Fletcher. The shape of it came into focus all at once, the way a photograph develops in a darkroom. First the outline, then the detail, then the thing itself, clear and undeniable. The dress upstairs on my desk, the chemical smell I had not been able to identify. The anniversary dinner on Thursday with 200 witnesses who would all attest that Fletcher had been standing at the front of the room giving a toast when his wife collapsed. The perfect alibi is the one where everyone in the room saw you doing nothing wrong. I set Stuart's USB drive on the table beside the envelope and looked at him. "You said you received a phone call," I said. I had not mentioned it, but he had assumed I would ask, which meant it was part of why he had come today specifically. "Sunday night," he said. "A blocked number. A voice I did not recognize. It said you did not see anything. Walk away." He pressed his lips together. I hung up and drove to my brother's house for the night. This morning I came here. I stood up and extended my hand. He shook it. "You did the right thing, Stuart," I said. "Do not go home tonight. Stay somewhere they do not know to look. I will be in contact through Leonard Pruitt. He is my attorney. Do not speak to anyone else about this until he reaches you." I walked back upstairs alone. My office was quiet. The white box sat exactly where I had left it in the corner of my desk, closed and still. I did not look at it. I sat down in my chair, picked up my personal cell phone, not the office line, and scrolled to a name I had not needed in this way before. Helena Marsh, 30 years of friendship, former criminal defense attorney, the one person I trusted without condition or reservation. I pressed call. She answered on the second ring. "It's me," I said. "Do not say anything yet. Just come." By the time her headlights swept across the kitchen window, I had been sitting at the table for 3 hours. The afternoon had not been idle. At 2:30, Dr. Raymond Voss, a toxicologist I had retained years ago during a contamination dispute involving one of our portfolio companies, had called me back on my personal line. He listened to my description carefully, the faint sharpness, the chemical undertone beneath the fabric, the way it had registered not as perfume, but as something industrial. He was quiet for a moment before he spoke. "Without a sample, I cannot be definitive," he said. "But what you are describing, that solvent quality, particularly on treated fabric, is consistent with a delivery agent used to stabilize certain alkaloid compounds, alkaloids that in sufficient concentration can disrupt cardiac rhythm." He paused. "I would strongly recommend you do not handle that garment without protection, and I would recommend we speak in person. Alkaloid compounds, cardiac rhythm." I had not needed him to say more than that. I had brought the box home from the office myself, carrying it at arm's length in the same latex gloves, setting it on the kitchen counter where I could see it. I had not opened it again. I had made myself eat something I did not taste, and had sat at the kitchen table with Stuart's files open on my laptop, reading the same lines again and again, until the numbers stopped feeling like numbers and started feeling like what they were, a motive, documented and time-stamped. Helena Marsh had known me for 30 years. She pulled into the drive at 8:14 in the evening, and when I opened the door, she looked at my face and did not waste time on pleasantries. She was 58 years old, tall with the kind of posture that comes not from training, but from a lifetime of standing in rooms where she was the most prepared person present. She had spent 22 years as a criminal defense attorney, the kind that other attorneys called when a case had become genuinely complicated, before retiring to Darien 12 miles up the coast. Retirement in Helena's case had mostly meant she chose which problems were worth her attention. She came inside, set her coat over a chair, and looked at the box on the counter. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. She read for 22 minutes without speaking. I refilled my coffee and waited. When she finished, she closed the laptop and folded her hands on top of it. "All right," she said. "Tell me about the dress." I told her everything. The smell Voss's called the latex gloves, the way Fletcher had stood on the other side of my desk and watched me with that controlled, careful expression while I told him it was beautiful. Helena was quiet for a long moment after I finished. Then she said, "You are not going to the police tonight." "No," I agreed. I had reached the same conclusion during the 3 hours I had been sitting alone. She laid out the problem the way she had once laid out case strategies methodically without sentiment. Stuart's documents were compelling, but they were assembled by a recently terminated employee with a clear grievance. A skilled defense attorney, and Fletcher would hire the best available, would argue fabrication within the first hour. The dress had not yet been formally tested, which meant there was no certified forensic report connecting it to a specific compound. And without a direct link between Fletcher and whoever had prepared whatever was on that dress, the chain of culpability had gaps that could be exploited. "What you have right now," Helena said, "is enough to make you certain. It is not yet enough to make 12 jurors certain. Those are two very different standards." She was right. I had spent enough years in negotiation rooms to know that certainty without documentation is simply an opinion. "What we need," she continued, "is for Fletcher to provide the evidence himself, not through what we find, but through what he does." She looked at the white box on the counter. "He gave you that dress expecting you to wear it Thursday night, which means Thursday night is when his plan becomes active, which means Thursday night is also when we are most able to document exactly what he intended and exactly what he did." I understood what she was suggesting before she finished saying it. "I wear the dress to the party," I said. "You wear the dress to the party," she confirmed. "And we make certain that everything that happens afterward is captured, verified, and unimpeachable." She paused. "But to do that properly, I need to bring in someone who is considerably better than either of us at the technical side of this." She reached for her own phone and turned it over in her hand. "His name is Marcus Weld," she said. "He spent 11 years with the National Security Agency before he moved into private practice. Security consulting, surveillance architecture, digital forensics. He is discreet, he is thorough, and he owes me a significant professional favor from a case I will not describe in detail." She looked at me across the table. "He is also, I suspect, already watching your husband. I say that because Marcus does not take on consulting contracts without doing preliminary background on the principals involved. And if Fletcher Marlowe's financial behavior has left the kind of trail that Stuart Finch managed to find, Marcus will have seen it." She set her phone face down on the table. "There is one other thing we will need," she said. "We need to know exactly what compound is on that dress, not Voss's instinct, his confirmation with a certified sample analysis. And we need to know where it came from and who prepared it. That is a very specific kind of knowledge. It does not come from a general chemist." She glanced again at the box. "Someone made that, someone with training, and that someone is the thread that connects the dress directly to Fletcher." She picked up her phone. "Let me call Marcus first," she said. "I think he may already know more than we do." Before she dialed, I sent a message to Cora: collect the white box from the kitchen counter first thing tomorrow morning and deliver it directly to Leonard Pruitt's office before 8. Sealed. Chain of custody documented from the moment she touched it. Cora replied in under 2 minutes. Understood. He arrived at 7:45 the following morning, before the fog had lifted off the harbor. Marcus Weld was 54 years old, compact and unhurried, in the way of someone who had learned long ago that urgency was a form of inefficiency. He had a quiet face, not unfriendly, but arranged in a way that offered nothing it had not decided to offer. He carried a single aluminum case and shook my hand with the straightforward grip of a man who did not believe in performing confidence because he had never needed to. Helena had not exaggerated his background. 11 years with the National Security Agency, specializing in signals intelligence and what the agency referred to as technical collection, the architecture of capturing information without being observed doing so. He had left federal service 12 years ago and had since built a private consulting practice serving a narrow clientele corporation's law firms and, on occasion, individuals with problems that required both discretion and precision. He set the aluminum case on the kitchen table and opened it without ceremony. "I need to tell you something before I show you what I have," he said, looking at me directly. "I was retained 3 months ago by a fiduciary trustee at a pension oversight firm. They had identified statistical anomalies in the fund reporting for Marlowe Capital's employee retirement accounts numbers that were internally consistent but did not align with independent market benchmarks. They hired me to conduct background research on the principals involved." He paused. "Your husband has been my primary subject since August." I sat down. "Then you already know about the transfers," I said. "I confirmed the pattern independently 6 weeks ago," he said. 47 transactions routed through Stonehaven Asset Holdings in the Cayman Islands. I was preparing a report for the trustee when Helena called last night. He looked at Helena briefly, then back to me. "What I have goes beyond the financial records." He opened a folder inside the case and laid 3 photographs on the table. They had been taken from a distance with a long lens in what was clearly the parking structure adjacent to the Stamford Marriott Hotel, a property approximately 15 miles northeast of Greenwich. In each photograph, Fletcher was visible entering or leaving the building. In 2 of the 3, he was accompanied by a woman. "Her name is Sloane Reeves," Marcus said. 36 years old. She holds a doctorate in food and nutritional chemistry from the University of Connecticut, completed 4 years ago. She has been employed as a senior research associate at a biotechnology laboratory in Stamford for the past 3 years. Her specialty is bioavailability, specifically how chemical compounds are absorbed by the human body through various routes of exposure. He let that sit for a moment. "She and your husband have met at that hotel every Thursday evening for the past 8 months. The word bioavailability. The science of how substances enter the bloodstream, whether through digestion, inhalation, or skin contact, did not require elaboration. I understood immediately why Fletcher had chosen someone with that particular expertise. Marcus then explained what he could offer technically. The camera he intended to install would be concealed in a piece of jewelry, a brooch, a pin, or a hair accessory of my choosing. It was a device roughly the size of a coat button, with a wide-angle lens capable of capturing both video and audio within a 12-foot radius. It transmitted wirelessly in encrypted real-time to a secure private server he maintained. The footage would be time-stamped, stored in a format admissible as evidence, and accessible to Leonard Pruitt's office the moment it was captured. He was careful to raise the legal question before I could ask it. "Connecticut requires all parties to consent to audio recording," he said. "For this footage to be usable in court, we need an authorization from the state's attorney's office, specifically a wire surveillance order based on probable cause. Leonard Pruitt will need to present the financial documentation and Voss's preliminary assessment to the state's attorney and make the application." He folded his hands. "Based on what I have, I believe that application will succeed, but it needs to be filed today." Helena was already reaching for her phone to call Pruitt. There was one additional matter Marcus wished to address regarding Thursday night. When Constance had originally booked the anniversary dinner with the Delamar, the hotel had offered a standard audiovisual package, a technician on staff, and a basic projection system for photographs. Marcus suggested I contact the events coordinator that morning and request permission to bring my own AV crew for the personal content portions of the evening. This was not unusual for events of this scale and would give Marcus direct control of the presentation system from a technical position backstage. The hotel, he said, would not question it. I made a note. He was replacing the photographs in the folder when he paused and removed one final image. It was a close-range shot, slightly out of focus, taken in the parking structure as Fletcher walked toward his car alone. "This was taken 6 weeks ago," Marcus said, after one of their Thursday meetings. In the photograph, Fletcher had his right hand raised to chest level. Between his fingers was a small glass vial no larger than a thumb with what appeared to be a pale liquid inside. He was looking at it the way a person looks at something they have checked many times and intend to check many more. "I have 4 photographs of him doing this," Marcus said. "Always after leaving the hotel. Always the same vial." He set the photograph on the table. "I do not know what is in it, but he carries it consistently, and he checks it carefully, and he has done so every week since I began surveillance." Helena looked at me across the table. Neither of us spoke. The vial was not a casual habit. A man does not check a small glass container with that regularity unless what it contains matters enormously to him, unless it is something he might one day need in a hurry. What happened on Wednesday afternoon, I only know because Helena told me. She told me word for word on the drive back from Stamford that evening, sitting in the passenger seat of her car while I looked out at the highway and listened without interrupting. This is what she said. Sloane Reeves lived in a 1-bedroom apartment on the 7th floor of a building in downtown Stamford, 12 blocks from the biotech laboratory where she worked. The apartment had a monthly rent that Marcus had identified as roughly 40% higher than her documented salary could comfortably support. The deficit he had noted in his report had been covered consistently for 8 months. Helena did not call ahead. She knocked at 4:15 in the afternoon and waited. The woman who opened the door was younger than Helena had expected, not from the photographs which had shown her clearly, but from the reality of her standing in a doorway in a gray sweater with her arms crossed and her expression arranged in the particular way of someone who had been anticipating this visit for at least 24 hours. Leonard Pruitt's office had reached her by phone the previous evening. Helena said she was not threatening. She did not begin with consequences. She came in, sat down at the kitchen table, and placed 2 things in front of Sloan: a printed copy of the email correspondence between Sloan and Fletcher that Marcus had recovered from a business server, and a single-page document on State's Attorney Patricia Ingram's official letterhead. Patricia Ingram was the elected state's attorney for Fairfield County, Connecticut, the jurisdiction covering Stamford, Greenwich, and the surrounding area. The document outlined the terms of a formal cooperation agreement, full immunity from prosecution, in exchange for complete and truthful testimony regarding Sloan's involvement in the preparation of a toxic substance and her knowledge of the intent behind its use. Sloan read the document twice. Then she set it face down on the table. She had not. She told Helena been told she was helping to kill someone. That was how she began. Fletcher had approached her 8 months ago through a professional connection, described himself as wanting to solve what he called a sensitive personal matter, and had been willing to pay in cash. He had told her he needed a compound that could be introduced into fabric, something that would cause a severe cardiovascular episode in a person with a pre-existing arrhythmia, without leaving the kind of markers a standard toxicology screen would immediately identify. The compound she developed was derived from aconitine, an alkaloid extracted from the aconitum plant, commonly known as monkshood or wolfsbane. It is one of the oldest known plant-based toxins, and in its refined form, it is exceptionally dangerous to anyone whose cardiac function is already compromised. An irregular heartbeat under the stress of aconitine exposure can deteriorate rapidly into full cardiac arrest within 30 to 90 minutes of skin contact. Sloan had dissolved a stabilized concentration of the compound into a solvent formula of her own design, one that would bind to silk charmeuse and remain active under normal atmospheric conditions for up to 2 weeks. She said she told herself it was a project, a formulation problem. She had not met me. Fletcher had referred to me only as his business partner. Helena told me she did not respond to that. She simply asked Sloan to continue. Fletcher had paid Sloan $40,000 in 3 installments. He had also asked her on a separate occasion to prepare an antidote for himself. He told her he was concerned about accidental contact with the compound, that if he inadvertently touched the garment or a surface it had contaminated, he wanted a way to counteract the exposure quickly. The antidote Sloan had prepared was a chelating agent, a substance that binds to the alkaloid compounds in the body and accelerates their elimination before they can affect cardiac tissue. She had given it to Fletcher in a small glass vial, sealed with a rubber stopper approximately 4 centimeters in length. Helena asked her to describe the vial precisely. Sloan described it. She also confirmed that Fletcher checked it regularly because the chelating agent had a limited effective window. He wanted to be certain it was still viable at the time he would need it. Then Helena asked her one question that I know she had been building toward from the moment she sat down. If the contents of that vial were replaced with something harmless, Helena said, but something visible, something that would demonstrate in front of 200 witnesses that the person drinking it expected to need an antidote, what would you recommend? Sloan was quiet for a long moment. Food-grade gentian violet, she said finally. It is a dye used in medical and laboratory settings. It is completely non-toxic, metabolized within hours, and it turns mucous membranes, the lips, the tongue, the inside of the mouth, a very distinctive blue within 60 seconds of ingestion. She paused. It is the kind of thing that is impossible to explain away in a room full of people. Helena thanked her, collected the signed cooperation agreement, and left. She called me from the parking garage before she started the car. It was past 6 in the evening, and her voice was entirely steady. I have everything, she said. But I need one more thing from you. I need access to Fletcher's suit, the charcoal one he wears for formal occasions. Not today, tomorrow morning before he leaves for the office. She paused. And I need Cora Blaine to be the one who arranges it. The 3 days between Helena's return from Stamford and Thursday morning moved with the particular quality of time that is simultaneously too fast and too slow, each hour dense with logistics, each night longer than it should have been. On Tuesday, the state's attorney for Fairfield County, Patricia Ingram, reviewed the materials Leonard Pruitt presented to her office: Stuart Finch's financial documentation, Dr. Voss's preliminary toxicology assessment, Marcus's surveillance report, and Sloan Reeves's signed cooperation agreement. By 4 that afternoon, Ingram had authorized a wire surveillance order under Connecticut General Statutes Section 54-41B, the provision allowing law enforcement to approve real-time audio and video capture when there is probable cause to believe a crime is actively being planned. The order covered the brooch camera and Marcus's secure server. Every second of footage captured Thursday night would be legally obtained. On Wednesday, Marcus spent 4 hours at the Delamar Greenwich Harbor in his capacity as a private AV technician retained by the Marlowe family for the anniversary event. The hotel's events coordinator had accommodated the request without question. It was not unusual for clients of this tier to bring specialized crew for personal content. By the time he left the property, Marcus had full access to the ballroom's presentation system and a direct encrypted link between his control panel backstage and the server receiving the brooch camera feed. Also on Wednesday, the original dress, the one from the white box, had been in Leonard Pruitt's office, safe since Monday night, sealed in an airtight evidence bag with a written chain of custody log. The replica, which Constance's personal tailor had completed in under 40 hours, using identical fabric sourced from the same Greenwich boutique, had been delivered to the estate Tuesday afternoon. The 2 garments were to any casual observer indistinguishable. All of that had happened before Thursday morning. Cora Blaine arrived at the estate at 7, as she always did before major events, to handle the preparatory details that required coordination. One of those details was the charcoal suit. Fletcher's formal attire was always pressed before important evenings. He was particular about it, and Cora had been managing this through the same dry cleaning service in central Greenwich for the past 4 years. She collected the suit from his dressing room, placed it in a garment bag, and drove it to the cleaner herself. Marcus had spoken with his contact at the cleaner the previous afternoon. While the jacket was being processed, a small glass vial was removed from the right interior breast pocket, its contents carefully emptied and replaced with a solution of food-grade gentian violet dye, a substance used in laboratory and medical settings, non-toxic, metabolized within hours, and capable of producing a vivid blue staining of the lips and oral tissue within 60 seconds of ingestion. The original chelating agent was preserved separately as evidence. The vial was returned to the pocket, the jacket was pressed to its usual standard, and Cora collected it at 8:45 and hung it in Fletcher's dressing room before he came downstairs. He never noticed. Dr. Raymond Voss arrived at 9. He was a careful, methodical man in his late 60s who had spent 3 decades working at the intersection of chemistry and medicine, and he brought with him a flat case containing what he described in plain terms as a medical-grade barrier coating. The substance used clinically to protect patients with severe chemical sensitivities from environmental exposure was a clear, water-resistant polymer film that, when applied correctly to the skin, created a physical seal over the pores. Oil-soluble compounds, including Aconitine-based alkaloids, could not penetrate it. It was invisible once dry, odorless, and effective for approximately 6 to 8 hours. The application took 40 minutes. Helena sat in the corner of the bedroom and read through Marcus's final technical briefing while Voss worked. When he finished, he gave Constance a brief set of instructions. Do not apply any additional product over the treated areas. Keep movement natural and left. Helena set down the briefing and looked at Constance. 2 layers, she said. The barrier is what protects you if anything goes wrong. The dress is what protects everyone else from ever knowing the barrier was necessary. She paused. Belt and suspenders. Constance understood. In a situation with this many moving parts, a single point of failure could unravel everything. The polymer barrier ensured that no matter what happened in that ballroom, regardless of whether the dress swap held under scrutiny, regardless of what Fletcher might attempt, she would walk out of the building on her own. She took the red dress from the garment bag on the closet door. The silk caught the morning light and held it deep and insistent, the same way it had when she had lifted it from the white box 4 days ago. She put it on slowly, and when she turned to the mirror, the woman looking back at her was composed and unhurried and completely prepared. Helena stepped forward and pinned the brooch camera to the side of her hair, a simple white gold piece she had worn to board presentations before, unremarkable enough to disappear into the overall impression of the evening. There was a faint click as it connected to Marcus's server. "Liv," Helena said quietly, checking her phone. There was a knock at the bedroom door. Fletcher's voice came through the wood, pleasant and even. "We should leave in 40 minutes. The car is downstairs whenever you are ready." "Thank you," Constance said. "I will be down shortly." She heard his footsteps retreat down the hall. She looked at herself in the mirror for one more moment. Then she picked up her evening bag, checked that her personal phone set to silent tracking Marcus's server status was inside, and turned away from her reflection. Cora's voice came from just outside the door, quiet and steady as always. "The car is here, Mrs. Marlowe. Before I take you inside that ballroom, if you are still with me, drop the number 7 in the comments right now. Just a 7. It lets me know you are here, and it means more to me than you realize." And one note before we continue, parts of what follows have been dramatized to bring this story to life. If that is not the kind of storytelling you are looking for, this is a good moment to step away. For everyone who stays, what happens at the Delamar changes everything. The limousine moved through the dark in silence. We had taken the same route on dozens of occasions down the long driveway of the estate and left onto Round Hill Road through the quiet residential streets of North Greenwich, where the houses sat far back from the road behind stone walls and old trees, then south toward the harbor. In October, the maples along this stretch had already turned, and the headlights caught the edges of the leaves as we passed amber and rust colors that look warm from a distance and cold when you stand among them. Fletcher sat beside me. He had his phone face down on his knee, which was unusual. Fletcher almost always had his phone in his hand. Tonight he had set it down, and he was looking out the window at the same darkness I was looking at, though I suspected we were not seeing the same things. I had spent 35 years learning the grammar of his silences. There was the silence of distraction, which came with a slight forward lean and the periodic flicker of his eyes to whatever problem was occupying him. There was the silence of contentment, which was rarer and came with a looseness in his shoulders. And there was this kind of silence, still careful and oriented outward, the way a person holds themselves when they are monitoring something they expect to happen. He was waiting. I looked at the passing houses and thought about the first time we had driven this road together, 36 years ago, before there was a company, before there was an estate, before there was anything that required a limousine. We had been in his car, a used sedan with a temperamental heater, and I had been telling him about the lease I had just signed on a single room above a hardware store on Greenwich Avenue, and he had said he believed in me with the easy certainty of someone who had not yet understood what belief would cost him. I had believed him then. That was the truth of it, the part I had spent this week sitting with. The betrayal was not the plan he had made. The betrayal was the 30 years of convincing me the first 5 years had been real. He turned from the window and looked at me. "You look extraordinary," he said. His voice had the warmth of a carefully maintained fire, consistent, controlled, never quite natural. "Thank you," I said. He reached across and placed his hand over mine on the seat between us. His hand was warm and dry and familiar in the way of something that had once meant everything, and now meant only what I could use it to prove. I did not move my hand away. I turned my palm slightly upward the way I had always done, and felt his fingers settle around mine. He believed it was working. We passed through the center of town, the darkened storefronts on Greenwich Avenue, the lights of the restaurants where other couples were having dinners that were exactly what they appeared to be, and then the road curved east toward the harbor, and the air changed the way it always does near water cooler, and with that particular salt and tide quality that had no equivalent further inland. Fletcher shifted in his seat. His right hand went briefly to the front of his jacket, a small practiced gesture, the kind a person performs without deciding to, and then returned to his lap. He did it the way you check a watch you have already checked 10 minutes ago. Not from urgency, from habit, from the need to confirm that what you are counting on is still where you put it. I had seen Marcus's photographs of him doing exactly that, 4 times over 4 separate Thursdays in a parking structure in Stamford. Now I had seen it with my own eyes 6 inches from my arm in the back seat of a car going to a party where he intended to be a grieving widower before midnight. I looked out the window. The road opened up as we reached the harbor, and the lights of the Delamar came into view ahead, warm amber against the dark water, the hotel's facade reflected in broken pieces across the surface of the Sound. It was a beautiful property, genuinely beautiful, and on another October evening in a different version of this marriage, I might have felt something when I saw it. Tonight, I felt only the clean, precise clarity of a person who has prepared for exactly this moment and arrived at it intact. The driver pulled to a stop along the entrance drive. There were guests ahead of us, and behind us, cars moving in the ordered sequence of a well-organized event. I could see the hotel entrance through the window, the lit doorway, the guests in formal dress, the brief flurry of greetings. And then I saw Helena. She was standing to the left of the main entrance, slightly apart from the arriving guests, in a dark coat with her hands at her sides. She was not looking in my direction. She was looking straight ahead toward the door the way a person looks when they are thinking about something else. As our car came level with the entrance and slowed, she turned not toward me, not quite, and gave a small, contained movement of her head. Barely a nod, the kind of signal that means nothing to anyone who does not know to look for it. It meant everything was in place. The driver opened his door. Fletcher stepped out first and extended his hand to help me from the car. I took it and stood, and the October air came at me all at once, cold and clear, and carrying the smell of the harbor. Fletcher straightened his jacket. "Ready?" he said. "Completely," I said. The grand ballroom of the Delamar Greenwich Harbor held 200 people with room to spare. It was a long, high-ceilinged room with windows along the south wall that looked out over the dark water of Long Island Sound. The hotel had dressed it for the occasion in cream and gold tall floral arrangements on each table, candlelight reflecting off the glassware, a string quartet working through something understated near the far wall. It was objectively a beautiful room. Fletcher had chosen it as he chose most things, with an eye toward what it communicated about the person doing the choosing. We moved through the entrance together, and the room came to us the way rooms do at these events, in waves of recognition, outstretched hands, the particular warmth of 200 people who are pleased to be included in something they consider significant. Fletcher handled it with the ease of a man who had spent 35 years practicing this exact performance. He laughed at the right moments, held eye contact long enough to seem genuine, and kept his hand at the small of my back with the proprietary ease of a devoted husband. I let him. Douglas Hart found us within the first 10 minutes. He was 71 years old, white-haired, with the upright bearing of someone who had chaired enough rooms to have forgotten what it felt like to be uncertain in one. He had served as chairman of the Marlowe Capital Board for 9 years, and he had always treated Constance with the particular respect that men of his generation reserve for women who have proven them wrong once and never let them forget it. He took my hand and held it for a moment. "Constance," he said, 35 years. I remember when 35 seemed like an impossible distance." He smiled, a real one, the kind that reaches the corners of a person's eyes and doesn't ask for anything. "You look remarkable." "Thank you, Douglas," I said. "I feel it." Fletcher steered him into conversation about the third quarter results, and I used the moment to look across the room. Sloane Reeves was standing near the bar on the east side of the ballroom. She had arrived separately as arranged with a guest pass issued through one of our corporate accounts, listed as an associate of a biotech firm that held a small position in one of our portfolio funds. She was wearing a dark dress and holding a glass of water she had not touched. She was not looking at me. She was not looking at Fletcher. She was looking at the middle distance in the way of someone who has committed to being somewhere difficult and is managing it breath by breath. I looked away. The evening moved in the way that large, well-organized events move, each segment folding into the next, the rhythm kept by the staff with the invisible efficiency of people who had done this hundreds of times. Dinner was served at 8. Fletcher ate and drank with the appetite of a man who had no reason to be anxious, and perhaps he didn't. Perhaps he believed the evening was entirely under his control. At 8:47, my phone set to silent in my evening bag registered a brief vibration. I excused myself to the powder room, checked it in a stall with the door latched, and read the message from Marcus. "System live, camera running, screen ready. I put the phone back in my bag and returned to the table. The string quartet had finished, and the room had shifted into the informal social mode that precedes the formal remarks at events like this, guests moving between tables, the volume of conversation rising slightly, the staff beginning the quiet work of clearing and resetting. Fletcher stood and buttoned his jacket. He exchanged a word with the evening's host, a member of our events team, who had been coordinating the program, and then moved toward the small raised platform at the front of the room, where a microphone stand had been placed. Helena appeared at my elbow. She had positioned herself at my table for the last 20 minutes, under the cover of conversation with another guest, and now she leaned in, her voice barely above the ambient sound of 200 people in a warm room. "Marcus is ready," she said. "Callahan is in position outside. Pruitt has the documents. Sloan knows what to do." A pause. "Whenever you are ready." I looked at Fletcher standing at the front of the room. He had a glass of champagne in his hand, and that particular expression he wore when he was about to speak publicly, the slight elevation of the chin, the breath before the performance. He tapped the microphone once. The room settled. "Good evening," he said, and his voice carried the warm authority of a man entirely at ease. "I want to thank everyone here tonight, colleagues, friends, people who have been part of this story in ways large and small. 35 years is a long time. It is long enough to build something real." He paused, looked across the room at me, and smiled with the full force of everything he had rehearsed. "And long enough to know exactly what you have." 200 people looked at me. I picked up my champagne glass, held it for a moment, and set it back down without drinking. "Before I tell you what I did the moment Fletcher raised that glass, leave the word dress in the comments. I want to know you are still here with me. Everything I spent 4 days building comes down to the next few minutes. Do not look away. And a note, some details ahead have been dramatized for storytelling. If that is not what you came for, you may step away now, no judgment. For those who stay, this is the part that matters." Fletcher had a gift for public speaking that I had spent 35 years watching him deploy. He understood pace. He understood the value of the pause, the moment of silence that makes the next word land with more weight than it would have otherwise. He understood that an audience needs to feel seen, and that making 200 people feel individually addressed is simply a matter of looking at them in groupings of 4 or 5, moving slowly enough that each cluster has time to believe the eye contact was meant for them specifically. He had learned these things in part by watching me. 35 years ago, he said, I married a woman who told me on our first date that she intended to build something that would last. I remember thinking she was talking about us. A gentle laugh moved through the room. She was talking about the company. More laughter, warmth. The room was with him entirely. I rose from my chair. It was a natural movement, the kind a spouse makes when she understands she is being invited forward when the speech is turning toward a toast, and the toasted person should be standing. Several people near me shifted to make a path. I moved toward the front of the room in the unhurried way of someone who has attended enough events to know how these moments are supposed to go. Helena had told me, do not fall too far from him. You need to be close enough that the movement is toward him, not away. I had counted the steps from my table to the edge of the raised platform during the walkthrough I had done in this room 3 days ago when I had come to meet with the hotel's events coordinator about the AV arrangements. 11 steps on the marble floor, 7 on the carpeted section approaching the platform. By the 5th step on the carpet, I was in the right position. Fletcher saw me coming and his smile widened. He extended his free hand toward me, a gesture that looked like invitation, like inclusion, like a man welcoming his wife into the moment. The room turned to watch. I have thought since then about what I owe the people in that room. 200 people who looked at me with genuine concern in the minutes that followed, colleagues who had worked alongside me for decades, friends who knew about my heart condition. Douglas Hart, who later told me he had aged 10 years in the time it took me to open my eyes. I used their fear deliberately. I used their love for me as a backdrop for a performance that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with what I needed to prove. I have made my peace with that. On the 16th step, the 3rd on the carpet, I let it happen. Not a dramatic collapse. I had thought carefully about this. A dramatic collapse would look like theater. What I needed was the specific frightening reality of a cardiac event in a person who has one, the sudden stillness that comes before the loss of balance, the hand that reaches for something that is not there, The way a person goes down, not like a falling object, but like a person whose legs have simply decided not to continue. My hand came out and found the back of a guest's chair. I felt the fabric under my fingers and let my grip loosen rather than tighten. My knees began to drop, controlled, deliberate, exactly as I had practiced in the privacy of my bedroom on Wednesday evening, with Helena watching and timing it. Fletcher was at my side in 4 steps. He was fast. I had expected him to be fast the moment required it, the audience required it, and Fletcher had always been at his most functional when the situation demanded performance. He caught me before I reached the floor, his arm going around my shoulders, his hand at the back of my head, and we went down together in a controlled way that must have looked from the room like a man desperately trying to keep his wife from hitting the ground. Someone in the room made a sound, not quite a scream, something more involuntary than that, the sound a person makes when they witness something their body registers as wrong before their mind has caught up. Then the room erupted. I heard it as a kind of roar that resolves quickly into individual voices, someone calling for a doctor, someone saying call 911, the scrape of chairs, feet moving fast on marble. I heard Douglas Hart's voice urgent and close, saying my name. I kept my eyes closed and my breathing shallow, the way Voss had described, not stopped, not dramatic, just reduced the way a person breathes when their body is protecting itself. Fletcher was holding me. His left arm was under my shoulders. His right hand was on my face, the side of it, the way you hold someone you are afraid of losing, which is a gesture that has a particular warmth to it, even when it is a lie. I could feel his heart beat through the contact between us. It was fast. Not the heartbeat of a frightened husband. Something more complicated than that, the elevated pulse of a man whose plan is arriving at its critical moment and who is managing simultaneously the requirements of grief and the requirements of what comes next. I could feel him thinking. I could feel the calculation running beneath the performance of despair. He leaned closer. His face was very near mine. His breath was warm against my cheek, and beneath the champagne I could smell the particular expensive cologne he had worn since the first year of our marriage, the one I had given him, and which he had never stopped using, because it was one of the few things he had not needed to calculate. He was close enough now. The dead, I have been told, hear nothing. This is the assumption on which Fletcher had constructed everything. The dress, the timing, the particular choice of a cardiac toxin, calibrated to a documented condition, all of it depended on one foundational premise, that when the moment came, the person he had planned for would be beyond reach, unconscious, diminished, already gone enough that what happened next would be a matter of form rather than consequence. He was holding me in a way that made this assumption visible. There is a particular quality to how a person holds someone they are afraid of losing, a trembling urgency, an imprecision born from emotion overcoming control. What I felt in Fletcher's arms was the opposite of this. His left arm was positioned beneath my shoulders with a deliberateness that supported without cradling the way a person manages a necessary object rather than reaches for a beloved one. His right hand was against the side of my face, warm, steady, the specific placement of a gesture that needed to be seen from the tables on his left and the chairs on his right simultaneously. He had positioned us precisely. Even now, even in this, he was thinking about sight lines. I kept my breathing shallow and let my body be entirely still. Around us, the room had become something I could hear but not see, a landscape of sound that organized itself in real time as the situation clarified for 200 people at different speeds. Directly behind us, chairs scraping. To the left, footsteps approaching and then stopping at an uncertain distance. Voices calling across each other, the specific tonal quality of people who are frightened and trying to be useful simultaneously. Someone had already called for a doctor. Someone else was on their phone. I heard Douglas Hart's voice somewhere to my right, saying my name in a way that meant he was asking someone else what to do. I heard someone moving fast near the stage and recognized the sound as the hotel's event coordinator, a woman who had been managing the microphone and the screen timing from a position near the wall. She was moving toward the side door, and I knew without seeing it that she was reaching for a house phone to call the front desk. I was aware of all of this, the way a person who has practiced stillness becomes aware of everything around them, not through effort, but through the particular sensitivity that arrives when the body has stopped performing and the mind has nowhere else to go. I was also aware of the brooch. It was pinned 3 centimeters above my left ear, and it had been transmitting since the moment Helena activated it in my bedroom that morning. The court-authorized wire order covered everything it recorded, every word, every ambient sound, every syllable spoken within its 12-foot radius. Marcus was receiving it in real time 3 rooms away. The footage was simultaneously backing up to a remote server outside Hartford. Whatever happened in the next 60 seconds would be documented with a precision that no courtroom would have grounds to question. I understood this, and I let it be true, and I waited. Fletcher's thumb moved slightly against my cheekbone, a small stroking motion that looked from any angle available to the room like tenderness. I felt the particular coldness of it, not the coldness of a man incapable of warmth, which would have been in its own way simpler. The coldness of a man who had learned to perform warmth so thoroughly that the performance had become indistinguishable from habit. 35 years of this. I had lived inside it. I had mistaken it at various points for the real thing. He leaned close. His face was near my ear, his breath warm and even controlled breathing, the breathing of someone managing themselves, and when he spoke, his voice was below anything the ambient room noise should have been able to drown. But the brooch was not relying on ambient conditions. "It's all right, Connie," he said. "I'm right here." I waited. "Just rest," he said. "Rest now. Not come back to me. Not please. Not the language of a man praying against an outcome he cannot control. Rest now, 2 words with a specific orientation, a specific relationship to time. They implied direction rather than return. They implied that wherever I was going, he was willing for me to continue going there. I had been waiting for something like this. Not these exact words, but the shape of them. The shape of a man who has stopped hoping for one thing and started waiting for another. I spoke without opening my eyes. My voice was very quiet, controlled to the volume of breath rather than sound, but precise. Every word placed where it needed to be. "Stonehaven Asset Holdings," I said. $52 million, a single breath between them. Stuart Finch delivered everything to Patricia Ingram's office on Tuesday. What happened in Fletcher's body in the next 3 seconds was the most honest thing I had witnessed from him in years, possibly ever. His grip did not tighten. It locked. The distinction is significant, and I want to be precise about it. Tightening is a muscular response to emotion, an involuntary surge. What I felt in his arm was categorically different, a freezing the sudden involuntary rigidity of a neuromuscular system, receiving information that has overloaded its current processing capacity. It traveled from his shoulder into the arm beneath my back and then into the hand against my face, which went from moving to absolutely completely still, the way a thing stops when the mechanism driving it has suddenly ceased. His breathing stopped, not gradually. It stopped in the middle of an exhale cut off the way. Sound cuts off when a recording ends and held for what I counted internally as 2 full seconds before resuming. When it returned, it was slower and more deliberate than before, each breath a small act of self-management, the physical equivalent of a man gripping a railing on a tilting surface. Beneath his cologne, the same cologne I had given him in the 2nd year of our marriage, and which he had worn every day since, without variation, which was itself a kind of data point I had never thought to examine, I detected something else. Something the body produces without permission. When the nervous system registers a threat it cannot immediately counter, faint, sharp metabolic. Fear has a specific chemistry. I recognized it because I had smelled it across negotiating tables in difficult quarterly reviews in the particular quality of a room when numbers are not going to reach their targets. I knew what it meant when someone became afraid of what they could not control. He was afraid of me. I had planned for many things over the course of this week. I had planned for the camera and the dress and the board and the screen and the vial in his pocket. I had not precisely planned for this specific feeling, lying in the arms of the man I had been married to for 35 years, listening to his fear arrive in his breathing, and understanding that the fear was real in a way that almost nothing else about this moment was. I opened my eyes. The ceiling of the Delamar's grand ballroom was cream and gold, and very far above me, and I held it for one moment before lowering my gaze to the face directly above mine. Fletcher was looking at me. The mask was not entirely gone. He had too many years of practice for that, too deeply a habituated relationship with the work of presenting a managed self to the world. But there was a fracture in it now, fine, but running through the entire structure, and through it I could see what had always been behind it. Not hatred, which would have implied a depth of feeling that I do not think he directed toward me specifically. Something colder and more impersonal, the expression of a man for whom other people have always been fundamentally factors in a calculation, who is watching one of those factors behave in a way his calculation did not accommodate. He said my name, just my name, barely above a sound. No accusation, no question. The reflexive utterance of a person whose mind has arrived at a place it recognizes as final. I placed my hand flat on the floor beside me. I pushed myself upright, slowly, deliberately, with the care of a person who wants the movement to be seen clearly by everyone in the room who is watching, and at this moment, everyone was watching. I came to my feet with the same steadiness I had carried into every board meeting and every negotiation and every room where I had needed to be the person who was not going to move. The room let out a breath. 200 people who had been holding something for the last several minutes released it simultaneously, and the sound it made was barely a sound at all, just the collective exhale of people who needed the person on the floor to be standing. I was standing. I turned to face the room. My hair was in place. The red dress was exactly as it had been when I had walked in. I was 60 years old, and I had just spent 4 minutes on the floor of a hotel ballroom performing unconsciousness, and I was upright, and I was ready. At the back of the room, the presentation screen, which had spent the last 2 hours cycling quietly through photographs of 35 years of marriage, went dark. The darkness lasted 4 seconds. I counted them. 4 seconds in which the room, still adjusting to the fact that I was standing, had not yet registered that something else was happening at the back of it. 4 seconds in which Fletcher remained on one knee on the carpet, one hand still extended slightly toward me, frozen in the posture of a man whose script has just been replaced by a different play entirely. Then the screen came back. What appeared first was not dramatic in its presentation, that was deliberate. Marcus understood that evidence which announces itself too loudly invites an audience to become skeptical. What appeared first was a spreadsheet, a clean, formatted financial ledger with columns for date amount, source account, destination account, and reference code. The first line read, January 14th, 2020, $987,000. Marlowe Capital Employee Pension Reserve, Stonehaven Asset Holdings, Limited, Grand Cayman. The second line, the third, the fourth. They continued scrolling one by one at a pace slow enough to read, but not slow enough to look away. 47 lines. Across the bottom of the screen in plain text were 2 sentences. These transactions represent $52 million redirected from the Marlowe Capital Employee Retirement Fund between January 2020 and September 2024. This documentation has been submitted to the Fairfield County State's Attorney's Office under the oversight of State's Attorney Patricia Ingram. The room had been quiet before. Now it became a different kind of quiet, the kind that forms when 200 people are processing the same information and have not yet agreed on what to do with it. The ledger dissolved. In its place, an email chain. The sender address was a private account, not a Marlowe Capital account, not a traceable business address. A personal account registered to a name that meant nothing until the recipient's address appeared, S.R. Chem, at a domain linked to Sloan Reeves's independent consulting work. The subject line read, Project Timeline, please confirm. The body of the most recent email was partially visible, enough to see the phrase, the delivery method we discussed, and the date September 28, 2024, 12 days before tonight. Someone in the room said something I did not catch. Another voice followed, and then another, and the sound of the room shifted from silence into the low collective murmur of people turning to the person nearest them and beginning to ask questions they did not yet have the words for. Then the audio began. It came through the ballroom speaker system with the clarity of something recorded on professional equipment, which it was. The first voice was Fletcher's. The words were quiet and precisely spaced the way words sound when they are whispered into a person's ear while surrounded by a chaotic room. It's all right, Connie. I'm right here. A pause. Rest now. Just rest. Then my own voice, even quieter, answering him, Stonehaven Asset Holdings, $52 million. Stuart Finch delivered everything to Patricia Ingram's office on Tuesday. In the upper right corner of the screen, a timestamp and a banner read, Court-authorized wire recording, Fairfield County, Connecticut. October 10th, 2024, 9:05 p.m. The room went completely still. I turned to face it. 200 people were looking at me. Some of them I had known for decades. Some of them had been in the room 11 years ago when Douglas Hart had introduced me at my first board address as the woman who had founded this company. Some of them had children whose college tuitions had been funded in part by pension savings that were, according to the ledger they had just read, no longer where they were supposed to be. "Good evening," I said. My voice was level and unhurried, the same voice I used in earnings calls and difficult negotiations, and every moment when the most important thing was to be the steadiest person in the room. "I apologize for the interruption to the evening." No one laughed, no one spoke. "What you have just seen is accurate," I said. "The documentation is real, the recording is legal, and the state's attorney's office has been in possession of this evidence since Tuesday of this week. I want to be clear about one more thing." I paused so that what came next would have the space it needed. "No current or former employee of Marlowe Capital who did not participate in these actions has any reason for concern about the security of their retirement accounts. That is something I am personally committed to addressing beginning tomorrow morning." Douglas Hart was standing. His chair had pushed back from the table at some point during the audio, and now he was on his feet with his hand flat on the tablecloth and an expression on his face that I had never seen there before. He was not looking at me. He was looking at Fletcher. I turned. Fletcher had risen from the floor at some point during the presentation. He was standing now 3 feet behind me, and the charcoal suit was exactly as it had been when Cora brought it home from the cleaners, pressed precise everything in its right place. His face was a different matter. The warmth was gone. The practiced ease was gone. What remained was something stripped and pale and very still, the expression of a man standing in the open who has just realized there is no available cover. His eyes moved to the screen, then to Douglas Hart, then to me. Then his right hand moved slowly, almost involuntarily, to the front of his jacket. His fingers found the breast pocket and pressed against it through the fabric, confirming what was inside. His hand remained there. He did not take the vial out. Not yet. The decision when it came was not rational. I could see that much from where I was standing. Fletcher's face had gone through 3 distinct states in the space of 90 seconds, the composure that had carried him through 30 years of boardroom negotiations. Then the fracture that came when he heard his own words played back to 200 people, and now something below both of those, the stripped animal clarity of a person who has run out of considered options and is operating on instinct. His hand came out of his jacket pocket. The vial was exactly as Sloane had described it. Small glass with a rubber stopper and a pale liquid inside that caught the ballroom light as he turned it in his fingers. He looked at it for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Around him, the room had settled into the particular silence that follows, shock not the absence of sound, but the suspension of it, 200 people waiting to see what came next before deciding what to think. Fletcher uncapped the vial. He drank it in one motion, the way a person takes medicine they have been dreading quickly, without pausing to reconsider, with the grim efficiency of someone who has already decided the alternative is worse. He swallowed. He lowered the empty vial to his side. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the color came. It moved faster than I had expected. Sloane had said 60 seconds, but Fletcher's system produced the reaction in under 30. His lips, which had been their usual color, began to deepen. The blue was not subtle. It was vivid and specific, the saturated blue of laboratory indicators and concentrated dyes spreading from the inner lip outward and across the tongue when he opened his mouth slightly, apparently to speak. The words did not come. He closed his mouth. The blue remained. Several things happened in rapid succession. A woman near the center of the room made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a word. A man 2 tables from the front pushed his chair back. The murmuring that had been building since the screen activated ceased entirely as 200 pairs of eyes went from the screen to Fletcher's face and processed what they were seeing. Douglas Hart spoke first. He was still standing behind his table, one hand pressed flat on the cloth, and his voice when it came was quiet enough that only the nearest 20 or so people heard it directly. But the room was silent enough that it carried. "What is that?" he said. Not to anyone in particular. The question of a man whose mind was already visibly assembling an answer he did not want to reach. I answered it for the room. "What my husband has just swallowed. I said, keeping my voice measured and clear, is the contents of a vial he has been carrying in his jacket pocket for the past several weeks. It is a chelating agent, a substance specifically formulated to counteract the effects of an aconitine-based compound when ingested or absorbed through skin contact. I paused to let that land. The color you are seeing is the result of a substitution made earlier today. The original contents of that vial have been preserved as evidence. What he drank is food-grade gentian violet, a laboratory dye that is completely non-toxic and will cause him no harm. I heard Fletcher draw a sharp breath behind me. The important question, I continued, is not what was in the vial tonight. The important question is why a man would carry an antidote to his wife's anniversary party. The answer is that he would do so only if he knew before arriving that there was something present that might require one. The room absorbed this. I watched it happen, the way understanding moves through 200 people who are hearing the same thing and arriving at the same conclusion from different directions. Some of them reached it quickly. The board members, the attorneys, the people who had spent careers parsing language for what it concealed as much as what it stated. Others were slower, and I could see the moment it arrived for each of them the slight change in posture, the eyes going to Fletcher's face, the subtle reorientation of everything they had believed about this evening when they walked in. Douglas Hart sat down, slowly, deliberately, as a man lowers himself into a chair when his legs have become unreliable. Fletcher had not moved. He was still holding the empty vial between his thumb and forefinger. His mouth closed, the color visible at the edges of his lips. He looked at the vial. He looked at me. The calculation that I had watched running behind his eyes for 35 years had stopped. There was nothing there now but the flat, cold recognition of a man who understands that the position he is in has no exit. He said my name. Just my name, nothing following it, not an accusation, not a question, just the one word quietly, as if he were reminding himself of something he had recently stopped believing was real. I did not answer. I turned back to face the room. There is one more thing, I said, that I would like to address. It concerns the dress. The room gave me a silence I had not experienced before in 35 years of addressing difficult audiences. It was not the polite silence of a conference call running long, or the sharp silence of a negotiation reaching its pivot point. It was something deeper and more involuntary than both of those, the silence of 200 people who have watched a man they considered distinguished drink a mysterious liquid and turn blue at the mouth, and who are now waiting with the collective stillness of people who understand that what comes next will determine how they make sense of everything that came before. I smoothed the front of the red silk with one hand, a gesture that was also in its way a demonstration. Look at me. Look at what I am wearing. I am standing here in this room in this garment entirely unharmed. Ask yourself why. The dress my husband selected for this evening arrived at my office on Monday morning, I said. When I opened the box and lifted it from the tissue paper, I detected an odor in the fabric, faint, industrial, inconsistent with any treatment process used in the preparation of luxury garments. I did not put it on. I did not handle it without gloves. I did not dismiss the instinct that told me to be careful. I paused to let that land. Within 12 hours of receiving the dress, I had arranged for it to be surrendered to the office of my attorney, Leonard Pruitt, in a sealed evidence bag. A signed chain of custody document establishing the date, time, and precise circumstances of its receipt was prepared that night. The following morning, the garment was independently tested by Dr. Raymond Voss, a certified toxicologist with whom I have worked professionally for over a decade. His analysis confirmed the presence of an aconitine-based compound dissolved in a specialized solvent designed to facilitate absorption through the skin. Several people in this room were clearly not familiar with aconitine. I had anticipated this. Aconitine is a plant-derived alkaloid with a documented history of use as a toxin going back centuries. In its refined, solvent-bound form, it penetrates the skin and attacks the electrical signals that regulate the heart. For a person already managing a cardiac condition, the effect is accelerating and, without intervention, fatal, typically within 1 to 2 hours of contact. I looked at the room with the same steadiness I had used in every boardroom I had ever entered. I have a diagnosed arrhythmia. It is documented in my medical records and in the company wellness disclosure I filed 3 years ago. Everyone in a senior position at this company has been aware of this for some time. The murmuring that followed was brief. People were not talking to each other, they were processing. I gave them a moment and then continued. The original dress is currently in Leonard Pruitt's office safe. It has been preserved under proper evidentiary conditions since Monday night. What I am wearing this evening is a replica. It was produced by my personal tailor over the course of 24 hours using fabric sourced from the same boutique where the original was purchased. The two garments are to visual inspection identical. The one I am wearing contains no compound of any kind. I let that settle before adding the final layer. As a secondary precaution, I was treated this morning by Dr. Voss with a medical-grade barrier coating a transparent polymer film used in clinical settings to prevent the skin absorption of environmental chemicals. This coating applied correctly creates a physical seal that oil-soluble compounds cannot penetrate. It is invisible, odorless, and was active for the duration of this evening. I paused. The barrier was a redundancy. The dress had already been replaced. But when the stakes are what they were, redundancy is not excessive. It is simply correct planning. The room had gone very still again. Into that stillness I said, "I would like to introduce someone who has something to tell you." The crowd near the East Bar parted without instruction. Sloane Reeves walked forward. She had been in this room for the entire evening, standing at the periphery in a dark dress, holding a glass of water she had not touched, watching the proceedings with the contained expression of someone managing a significant internal experience in a very public setting. I had noticed her 3 times during the evening, once near the bar when we arrived, once during dinner, when her eyes moved briefly to Fletcher, and then away, and once during the audio playback when she had looked at the floor. Now she walked to the center of the room and stood where I indicated directly to my left in the open space at the front, and she faced the audience with her hands at her sides and her chin level. "My name is Sloane Reeves," she said. Her voice was clear and did not waver. "I hold a doctorate in food and nutritional chemistry from the University of Connecticut. I am the individual who, at the direction of Fletcher Marlowe, developed the compound that was applied to the original dress." The room absorbed this in waves, the people nearest her understanding first, then the understanding moving outward like something dropped in still water. "Mr. Marlowe approached me approximately 8 months ago," she continued. "He described the objective in terms of resolving a business liability. He did not use names. He outlined the relevant medical condition, a cardiac arrhythmia, and requested a formulation that would interact with it in a specific and fatal way while producing a presentation consistent with natural cardiac failure." She paused. "I developed the compound. I provided it to him. I understood at some level what it was intended for. I chose to proceed regardless." She said the last sentence with the particular flatness of someone who has decided to be precise about their own guilt rather than mitigate it. "I have provided a complete written and verbal account of my involvement to Detective Callahan and to the Fairfield County State's Attorney's Office under a formal cooperation agreement. Every communication between myself and Mr. Marlowe, along with all technical documentation, has been surrendered." She stopped. She did not look at Fletcher. She had made a decision not to, and she held to it. I spoke again. "The original killing agent that was in the vial Mr. Marlowe drank from, tonight the antidote he prepared for himself, has also been preserved as evidence. Its composition matches precisely the compound Sloane Reeves formulated and delivered to him. This confirms 2 things: that he knew what was in the dress, and that he took deliberate steps to protect himself from it while making no corresponding provision for me." I looked at Fletcher as I said this last sentence. He was standing where he had been standing for the past 4 minutes, very still, very upright, one hand loose at his side and the other still holding the empty vial. The blue had faded slightly at the corners of his lips, but remained vivid enough to be visible from across the room. He was looking at the floor now, and the particular quality of his stillness had shifted from control to something more fundamental. The stillness of a person who has run out of interior resources and has found at the bottom of that well simply nothing. Douglas Hart had both hands flat on the table in front of him. He was looking at Fletcher with an expression I had never seen on a man of his particular composure, not anger, which would have been manageable, but something that looked like the physical sensation of having believed something for 9 years and discovering it was hollow all the way through. A woman 3 tables back had covered her mouth with both hands. The silence had a texture now dense and specific, the silence of a room that has witnessed something it will not easily set aside. At the far end of this ballroom, the main doors opened. Detective Ray Callahan walked through them with the unhurried authority of a man who is arriving exactly when he said he would. The room which I had not believed could become more silent found a way. Callahan did not hurry. That was the first thing I noticed, the specific, deliberate pace of a man who has no reason to rush, because the situation has already resolved in the only direction it was ever going to go. He moved through the ballroom from the double doors to the front of the room in a straight line, and the crowd parted for him with the particular deference people extend to authority when it arrives with certainty rather than force. There was no urgency in his step. There was no performance of power. There was simply a man walking toward a destination he had arranged to reach at this exact hour in this exact room. 2 officers entered behind him. They separated without instruction, one positioning near the main exit, one moving to a point 3 yards to Callahan's right. They were in plain clothes, and most of the room registered them only in the peripheral way of people whose primary attention is directed elsewhere. Later, several guests would tell journalists they had not noticed the additional officers until after the arrest was complete. Callahan stopped in front of Fletcher. The space between them was perhaps 6 feet. I was standing 4 feet behind and to the left of Fletcher, which gave me a clear angle on both faces, simultaneously something I had not planned but found in that moment to be exactly the view I needed. Fletcher was looking at Callahan with the expression of a man taking inventory of a situation that has moved beyond the range of outcomes he was prepared to manage. It was not panic. Fletcher had been in difficult rooms before. He knew how to stand in them. But there was something in the quality of his stillness that was different from composure. It had the rigidity of a structure that is holding its shape by force rather than by design. And I understood watching him that this was what the end of his resources looked like. Callahan produced his credentials and identified himself in the precise, practiced way of someone for whom this procedure is both legal necessity and professional habit. His name, his title, his badge number, his division. His voice was even and entirely without inflection, which was in its own way more effective than any theatrical version of authority would have been. "Fletcher Marlowe," he said. "You are under arrest on suspicion of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree and criminal misappropriation of funds in violation of Connecticut General Statutes sections 53A-54A and 53A-122. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you prior to any questioning. Do you understand these rights as I have read them to you?" Under Connecticut law, the Miranda warning is required to be given at the point of arrest before any custodial interrogation can take place. Its purpose is to inform the individual of their constitutional protections under the Fifth and Sixth Amendments. The language is standardized. It has been spoken in this form in rooms very different from this one, to people very different from Fletcher Marlowe, for decades. Fletcher said, "I want my attorney." His voice was completely level. Whatever he was managing internally, his voice had not yet surrendered to it. "You will have the opportunity to contact your attorney at the processing facility," Callahan said. He nodded to the officer on his right. The handcuffs made a sound I have tried to describe to myself since and have not found adequate words for. It was dry and metallic and mechanical, the sound of a small ratchet mechanism doing what it was designed to do. Not loud, quieter, in fact, than I had expected. But in a room this silent, quieter than expected, carries further than loud. Fletcher brought his hands together in front of him before the officer reached him. He did not resist, did not flinch, did not speak. He had made a calculation, the same kind of calculation he had been making his entire career, and the calculation was that compliance now would cost him less than any alternative. He was right about that, and the fact that he was right even now told me something about who he had always been. The officer secured the cuffs with the practiced efficiency of someone for whom this was neither remarkable nor weighty. Fletcher looked down at his own hands for one moment, the vial still between his fingers, which the officer quietly removed and placed in a small evidence bag without comment, and then he looked up. He looked at me. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. He did not say anything. He did not make any gesture. He simply looked at me across the 7 feet of ballroom carpet between us, and in that look I found something I was not expecting, and have spent considerable time since attempting to name accurately. It was not hatred. It was not the compressed fury of a man who believes he has been wronged. It was not calculation, which was the expression I had spent the most time with and had learned to read most clearly. It was something older than any of those things, and harder to categorize something that might in a different life and a different room have been called recognition. He looked at me the way you look at someone who has understood something about you that you had hoped would remain ununderstood. Then the officer indicated the direction of the exit, and Fletcher turned and he walked. He walked the way he had always walked into every room of his professional life, with his shoulders back and his chin level and the particular bearing of a man who intends to be taken seriously. It was under the circumstances an extraordinary act of maintenance. I watched it and felt alongside everything else I was feeling, something that was neither admiration nor contempt, but sat in the complicated space between them. He did not look back. He moved through the parted crowd, through the double doors and out of the ballroom. The doors swung closed behind the officers who followed him. The sound they made was quieter than you would expect for doors that size. For a moment, no one in the room moved. Then the room began to come apart in the specific way that large gatherings come apart, when the event that organized them has concluded more dramatically than anyone anticipated. A table near the back scraped against the floor. Voices found themselves again low at first, then overlapping, then the complicated social noise of 200 people trying to process something collectively that can only ever be processed alone. Several guests moved quietly toward the exit. Several others reached for their phones. A woman near the center of the room, whom I had met once at a fundraiser 6 years ago, and whose name I could not retrieve in that moment, was crying in a contained way that she was clearly trying to manage, and I understood that she was not crying for Fletcher, but simply from the weight of having been in the room where it happened. Near the East Bar, I watched one of Callahan's plainclothes officers approach Sloane Reeves, who had remained at the edge of the room throughout. He spoke to her briefly and indicated the side corridor. She nodded and went with him without looking at anyone. She had done what she came to do, and she knew it, and she left with the same quiet discipline she had carried through the entire evening. Douglas Hart reached me first. He came around 2 tables to get to where I was standing, and he stood in front of me with his hands at his sides and his face carrying an expression I had not seen on him before, not the practiced authority of a chairman, not the professional warmth of a man managing a room, but something unguarded and genuinely shaken. He was 71 years old, and he had run boardrooms for 35 of those years, and what had happened in the last 45 minutes had cost him something that would take time to account for. "Constance," he said, "just my name. Nothing following it because he had not yet found the words, and he was honest enough not to use words he had not found. Tomorrow," I said. "We will talk properly tomorrow, Douglas, and we will fix it." He nodded. He took my hand briefly, both of his wrapping around it, the way people do when they want to convey something that language is not adequate for, and then he let go. Helena appeared at my left shoulder. She placed 2 fingers on my arm, the same gesture she had used when Callahan first walked in, the signal that meant she was there and everything was in motion. This time it meant something different. This time it meant you can let it be over now. Cora was 3 feet away, waiting with the patience of someone who understands that the situation requires patience and is entirely willing to provide it. "Mrs. Marlowe," she said when I turned to her, "Mr. Hart has asked whether you would be available to meet with the board. Several members are still in the hotel. He said it need not be long, but he would appreciate the opportunity." I looked at the doors through which Fletcher had been taken. Then I looked at the room around me, the guests, the tables, the screen at the back now dark again, the remnants of an evening that had become something none of its 200 attendees had arrived expecting. "Tell them I will be upstairs in 20 minutes, I said. The hotel had a private sitting room off the east corridor, a small, well-appointed space intended for the kind of conversations that require a closed door and no windows visible from the main areas. Detective Callahan had identified it within minutes of arriving that evening and arranged for its use with the hotel manager before the party reached its climax. While the grand ballroom was managing its aftermath, the guests with their phones, the staff with their uncertain instructions, Douglas Hart, with his 14 years of institutional memory, trying to process what they meant Sloane Reeves was in that room with Callahan and Leonard Pruitt. I was not. I had found a chair in a small private lounge on the opposite side of the hotel. Helena had brought me water I did not drink, and sat nearby in the specific way she had of being present without requiring anything back. I spent 40 minutes in that chair doing very little, which was, I had decided exactly what I was going to allow myself before the next thing began. Pruitt found me at 10:20. He was 63 years old, lean and precise in the way of a man who had spent 4 decades choosing words carefully in rooms where the wrong one could alter an outcome. He sat in the chair across from me, set his leather document folder on the low table between us, and told me what had happened in the sitting room off the east corridor. Sloane Reeves had spoken for 51 minutes. Her account was complete, chronologically ordered, and given without any apparent attempt at self-mitigation, beyond the single fact she had established at the outset that Fletcher had described the objective of the project to her in terms she understood to be commercial rather than personal. He had never referred to me by name. He had referred to me consistently as the controlling interest. Pruitt said she delivered this detail with a flatness that he had found more disturbing than any version of remorse would have been. She confirmed the full technical account, the Aconitine formulation, the solvent carrier, the absorption timeline, the specific dose calculated against a documented cardiac condition. She confirmed the communication method encrypted messaging through a private platform accounts now preserved by Marcus's server records. She confirmed the payment structure, $40,000, in 3 cash installments delivered to a post office box registered under a name she had provided to Callahan's team. She also confirmed something that Pruitt said Callahan had not been expecting. 3 weeks before the anniversary dinner, Fletcher had contacted Sloane with what he described as a contingency request. He had told her that if the primary timeline was disrupted, if the event was postponed, if circumstances changed, he might need an alternative delivery method. He had not specified what that method would involve. He had asked her to remain available. She had agreed. The contingency was never activated. The party proceeded as planned. But the existence of the conversation logged in the encrypted messaging records, now in the possession of Callahan's team, established that Fletcher Marlowe had been planning this for a minimum of 8 months, had prepared multiple pathways to the same outcome, and had been systematic enough to build in redundancy. Pruitt paused at that point and looked at me in the way he sometimes did during difficult conversations, not with sympathy, exactly, which was not his primary register, but with the specific attention of a person making sure that the information he has delivered has been properly received before he adds to it. "There is a financial matter," he said. "Approximately 7 weeks ago, Fletcher established a second external account, separate from Stonehaven, registered through a different jurisdiction. The amount currently held there is $4,300,000. I looked at him. "He was building an exit," I said. "That is what it appears to be," Pruitt said. "The state's attorney's office will move to freeze both accounts. The Stonehaven funds and this second account are not recoverable immediately. That process will take time and coordination with the relevant foreign financial authorities. But the state's attorney's office is experienced in this area, and the documentation is extensive." I looked at him. "He was building an exit," I said. "That is what it appears to be," Pruitt said. "The DA's office will move to freeze both accounts. The Stonehaven funds and this second account are not recoverable immediately. That process will take time and coordination with the relevant foreign financial authorities. But Ingram's office is experienced in this area, and the documentation is extensive." I thought about Stuart Finch, who had driven to my office on a Monday morning with a USB drive and 3 days without sleep, because he understood that the people whose retirement savings were held in that fund had no one else in a position to act quickly enough. "The employee pension accounts," I said. "Marlowe Capital's assets are sufficient to cover the shortfall," Pruitt said. "The mechanism for doing so will need board authorization, which brings me to the reason I came to find you." He opened his document folder and removed a single sheet, a handwritten list of names, 12 of them each with a check mark beside it. 12 of the 14 board members who had been in the hotel that evening reached by Hart in the last 90 minutes and confirmed willing to convene. "Douglas Hart has secured the executive conference room on the 4th floor," Pruitt said. "He has asked whether you are ready." He paused. His exact words, if it is useful to you, were, "She built this company and it is still hers, and we are waiting for her." I looked at the list of names for a moment. 12 people in a room on the 4th floor of a hotel at 10:30 on a Thursday night, because the institution they had been trusted to oversee needed to hear from the person who had created it. I stood up. "Tell Douglas I am on my way," I said. The executive conference room on the 4th floor of the Delamar was considerably smaller than the ballroom 2 levels below it, and considerably quieter, and in every way that mattered to me at that moment, it was a better room. 12 people rose when I walked in. I did not ask them to sit, and they did not do so, until I had taken the chair at the head of the table, the chair that Douglas Hart had vacated to stand at the right side of the room, leaving its position for me without being asked. That single gesture, more than anything else that had happened in the last 3 hours, told me something important about where we stood. I looked around the table. 12 board members, 7 of whom had been in the ballroom downstairs less than 2 hours ago, 5 of whom had driven back to the hotel when Hart called them at their homes after the arrest. Their faces had the specific quality of people who have processed a large amount of disturbing information and arrived by different routes at the same destination, a clear-eyed understanding that the institution they were responsible for overseeing had been compromised, and that this meeting was the first step toward repairing it. I appreciated that quality in a room. It made the work faster. "Thank you for coming tonight," I said. "I know it was not what any of you anticipated when you arrived this evening. I will be as direct as I can, and then we will vote, and I would like everyone to be home before 1 in the morning." A quiet, brief movement of something that might have been relief went around the table. People who have been through something difficult want more than almost anything else a person at the front of the room who knows what they are doing. The first resolution was straightforward: the immediate suspension of Fletcher Marlowe from all positions, titles, and authorities within Marlowe Capital Group, pending the outcome of the criminal proceedings. Hart moved it. A board member named Cecile Okafor, who had served for 7 years and had the reputation of being the most careful voter on the board, seconded it without hesitation. It passed unanimously and without discussion because there was nothing to discuss. The second required more explanation, which I provided. The $52 million deficit in the employee pension reserve had been created through the mechanism I described, 47 transactions over 4 years, authorized by a CFO whose dual signatory authority had never been questioned because the board reports had been falsified to conceal it. The company's liquid assets were sufficient to cover the deficit in full. What was required was the board's formal authorization to deploy those assets for that purpose, with the instruction that the restoration be completed within 30 business days. I told them about Stuart Finch. I told them that he had walked into my office on Monday morning with documentation he had spent months assembling at personal risk, that he had been fired in what now appeared to be a deliberate attempt to eliminate the most knowledgeable internal witness, and that he deserved not only his position back, but formal recognition that he had done the right thing at a moment when it would have been considerably easier not to. The board authorized the pension restoration and the reinstatement resolution together in a single motion, passed 12-0. The third matter was the question of leadership. Marlowe Capital could not operate without a functioning executive structure, and the situation required both a CEO and a CFO to be named in an acting capacity until a formal appointment process could be completed. I did not propose myself. I waited to see whether the board would. Douglas Hart proposed it. Cecile Okafor seconded. I was appointed Acting Chief Executive Officer and Acting Chief Financial Officer of Marlowe Capital Group, effective immediately with a formal election to be held within 60 days. Hart brought the resolutions to me in a single folder, 3 pages each requiring a signature. He also placed a pen on the table beside the folder. It was an ordinary hotel pen, the kind found in every conference room in every hotel in the country, with the property's name printed on the side. I looked at it for a moment. Then I opened my evening bag and took out the pen I had been carrying since that morning, a plain black pen from the right side of my desk at the office, the one I had used every workday for the last 11 years. Helena had told me when we were reviewing the plan on Tuesday to bring a pen from my office. She had said it the way she said most things, without explanation, with the certainty of someone who had already thought it through. I used my pen. The signatures took 30 seconds. The resolutions would be filed with the company's legal counsel first thing Friday morning. Douglas Hart walked me to the door when the meeting closed. The other board members filed out with the particular efficiency of people who are tired and have decided that the remaining details can wait until daylight. Hart held the door and looked at me in the corridor with the expression of a man who has several things he wants to say and is deciding which of them are appropriate for tonight. "You should sleep," he said finally. "Tomorrow," I said. He nodded, and I left him in the corridor, and I took the elevator down to the lobby alone. Helena was there. She was in her coat, standing near the front entrance with her keys in her hand, and she watched me cross the lobby with the expression she had been wearing since this morning, the focused, alert expression of someone who is still on duty and will not stand down until the person she is protecting is safely somewhere else. We walked out into the October night together. The harbor was dark beyond the hotel grounds, and the air was cold in the way that October air in Connecticut is cold, with the specific quality of a season that has made up its mind. Neither of us spoke until we reached her car. "How do you feel?" Helena said. I thought about it honestly. "I don't know yet," I said. "Ask me tomorrow." She unlocked the car. "Come on," she said. "Let's go home." The house was exactly as we had left it 5 hours ago. That was the strange thing. The lights I had set on timers came on when Helena's car pulled into the drive, as they always did, and the front hallway smelled of the same dried flowers Cora had arranged in the entry table 2 weeks ago, and the oak tree in the yard was still there in the dark, moving in the October wind. Everything was exactly where it had been. The house did not know that something fundamental had changed. I stood in the entrance for a moment after Helena closed the door behind us. His reading glasses were on the hall table. He had left them there on Monday morning, the last ordinary morning, and no one had moved them. They were folded, one lens slightly smudged, the right arm slightly bent from where he had a habit of setting them down too quickly. 35 years of small habits accumulate into a kind of furniture. You stop seeing it. Then in a single evening, you begin to see it all at once. I picked up the glasses, held them for a moment, and set them back down. Helena put on the kettle without asking. She moved through my kitchen with the ease of someone who had stood in it many times over 30 years, who knew where the cups were kept and how the faucet ran cold before it ran warm, and which drawer had the good spoons. I was grateful for this, for the presence of someone who required no explanation and needed no inventory of the evening's events, because she had been inside every moment of it. I went upstairs. The red dress I removed carefully and hung on the back of the closet door, not put away, not discarded, simply moved. It had done its work. What I did with it afterward was a decision for another day, when I had rested enough to make decisions that were not purely practical. I changed into loose dark clothes, the kind that ask nothing of the person wearing them. I washed my face at the bathroom sink with the particular attention of someone removing the last evidence of a performance. The makeup, the careful presentation, the version of herself that had stood in a ballroom and spoken to 200 people. What was left in the mirror was simply a woman, 60 years old, tired to a specific depth, still standing. I went back downstairs. Helena had made tea and was sitting at the kitchen table. The tray with Stuart Finch's documents had been on this same table 4 nights ago. The table was empty now except for 2 cups and the low amber light of the overhead fixture at its dimmest setting. Outside, the oak tree moved against the dark sky. The kitchen had the specific intimacy of late night, in a house where 2 people have known each other long enough that silence is not an absence, but a presence of its own kind. I sat down across from her. We did not speak for several minutes. "I keep waiting to feel something I can name," I said finally. "I know what happened. I know what it means. I can trace every step of it from Monday morning to tonight, and I understand each piece. But I cannot seem to locate the correct feeling to place beside all of that." Helena turned her cup in her hands. "What does it feel like instead?" I thought about this carefully, the way she had taught me to think carefully over 30 years of friendship. "Like when you have been carrying something heavy for a very long time," I said, "and someone finally takes it, and for the first few minutes, all you can feel is your own arms, which still hurt." She nodded. "That sounds right." I looked at the table. "I keep thinking about the night we signed the first lease," I said. "September 1989. A room above a hardware store on Greenwich Avenue. One window, one radiator that knocked every 20 minutes. Fletcher had helped move boxes from the car. He made 2 trips for every one of mine. He did not comment on it, did not ask for acknowledgement. He simply kept going back down the stairs and coming back up with something in his arms. I paused. When everything was inside, he sat on a box and looked at the empty room. Not at me, at the room itself. And there was something in his expression that I had not seen before and did not see often after he looked genuinely pleased. Not for himself, for what the room might become. Helena did not say anything. She let the memory stand by itself. I have spent 4 days trying to determine whether that was real, I said. Whether what I saw on his face that night was a performance that had already begun, or whether it was something genuine that existed once and was later replaced by something else. And I cannot determine it. I look at that evening and it refuses to resolve into one thing or the other. Maybe it was both, Helena said. Maybe he believed in you that night, and he also did this. People are not generally just one thing, Constance. The man who carried your boxes in 1989 and the man who ordered that dress are the same man. That does not make the 1989 man false. It makes the whole picture more difficult, which is different. I looked at her. Is that supposed to be comforting? No, she said. I think it is just true. There was one other memory I had been avoiding since Monday. I spoke it now because the kitchen at this hour felt like the right place for things that had been avoided. There was a morning about 8 years ago, I said. We had had an argument the night before. I cannot remember what it was about, which tells you something about how serious I thought it was at the time. I came downstairs before he woke up, and I sat at this table, and I thought very clearly something is different. Not wrong. Different. The specific texture of the marriage had changed in some way I could not name. I looked at the cup between my hands. I told myself I was tired. I told myself it was the company, the pressure of that quarter. I convinced myself so completely that I stopped feeling the thing I had felt, and I never went back to examine it. I paused. 8 years ago. Helena was quiet for a long moment. Constance, she said. I know, I said. I know. She leaned forward slightly. You are not going to spend the rest of your life reinterpreting every moment you missed as evidence that you should have known sooner. People who love someone extend them the assumption of good faith. That is not naivety. That is what love requires. Is it? It is, she said. And the fact that it was used against you does not make it wrong. It makes him wrong. I sat with that. The clock on the kitchen wall read 20 minutes past 1. At some point, the wind outside had settled, and the oak tree had stilled, and the house was very quiet, in the way that houses become at the outer edge of night, when everything mechanical has cycled down to its baseline, and the only sounds are the ones a building makes when it is simply holding its own structure together. Helena stood and went to the cabinet above the refrigerator. She took down the wine, the good bottle I kept for occasions, which this certainly was, and 2 glasses and poured them both without asking, because we were 30 years past the point where asking was required. She set 1 glass in front of me and held the other. She looked at me across the kitchen table. 58 years old, tired herself, her coat still half over the back of her chair, her hair slightly less composed than it had been at 7:30 when she had stood at the entrance of the Delamar and given me the smallest possible nod that meant everything was ready. This woman had spent 4 days helping me execute the most consequential week of my life, and she had done it the way she did everything without spectacle, without requiring anything back, with the steady, practical affection of someone who has long since decided that you are worth the effort. She raised her glass. To the woman, she said, who never needed saving. I picked up my glass. That is not entirely true, I said. She held my gaze. Close enough. We drank. Outside, the oak tree caught the wind again, one brief movement, then stillness. I looked at it through the kitchen window and thought about what the next year would contain. Lawyers' depositions, a trial that would be covered by people who had not been in the ballroom and would need everything explained to them from the beginning. A company to rebuild. A house to decide about. A life to reassemble from the pieces of the one that had just ended and the parts of myself that had been here quietly all along. None of it was going to be easy, but none of it, I realized, was going to be done alone. And that was something I had not fully understood until this week, how much I had needed to know. I did not sleep in the chair. I finished the wine, said goodnight to Helena, and went upstairs to my bed, which was exactly the same bed it had always been, and also now entirely different. I lay down in the dark and closed my eyes. It was not yet tomorrow. Tomorrow, I understood, was going to be very long. But it was the tomorrow I had chosen, and I was ready for it. The light came in the way October light does, in Greenwich, pale and without apology, arriving gradually, rather than announcing itself, filling the kitchen by degrees, until the darkness had retreated to the corners and then left entirely. I was still in my chair. I had not intended to sleep there. At some point after the wine and the oak tree and Helena's toast, the weight of the week had settled on me in a way that proved too complete to manage upright, and I had folded my arms on the kitchen table and closed my eyes for what I intended to be a few minutes. When I opened them, the kitchen was full of pale morning light, and the chair across the table was empty, and the second wine glass had been rinsed and set on the drying rack. There was a note on the table written on the back of one of the paper napkins in Helena's handwriting, which was small and precise and almost entirely without sentiment. It said, "I will call you at 9. Get dressed, go to work, you have a company to run." Beneath this, in smaller letters, "Thank you for letting me help." Then H. I read it twice, then folded it and put it in the pocket of my loose dark trousers, where it stayed for the rest of the day. I showered, dressed, and made coffee. I chose a charcoal suit, not Fletcher's color, not something he had ever commented on, just a suit I had bought 3 years ago and worn to 100 unremarkable Tuesday mornings. I put on the earrings I wore every day. I made my coffee the way I always made it, strong with nothing added. These were small decisions, and they were easy, and that ease was its own kind of information. My phone rang while I was lacing my shoes. Stuart Finch. His voice was rough with the particular texture of someone who has not slept and is past the point where it matters. "Mrs. Marlowe," he said, "I wanted to—" He stopped, started again. "I wanted to say thank you, and to say I am sorry for what it cost you." "Stuart," I said, "you walked into my office on Monday morning and told me the truth. That is not a thing that requires an apology." I paused. "You will hear from Leonard Pruitt today. Your position is being formally restored. We will talk properly when you have rested." He said my name again and then said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you." And that was all. He did not need to say more, and I did not require it. Callahan called at 7:40 while I was pulling out of the drive. Fletcher had been processed at the Fairfield County Correctional Center in Bridgeport. His arraignment was scheduled for Monday morning in Stamford Superior Court. The charges were conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree and criminal misappropriation of funds felonies that carried in Connecticut significant mandatory minimum sentences if the prosecution's evidence held at trial. Callahan's tone on this point was measured without being reassuring. The evidence, he said, was extensive, and the state's attorney's office was treating the case as a priority. Both external accounts, Stonehaven Asset Holdings, and the second account identified in Sloan's testimony were under emergency court-ordered freeze pending asset recovery proceedings. The process of returning the $52 million to its rightful place would take time and would require coordination with foreign financial authorities, but the pathway was clear and the documentation was thorough. Sloan Reeves had spent the night in a hotel in Stamford under her own recognizance per the terms of the cooperation agreement. She was scheduled to provide a formal recorded statement to the state's attorney's office on Friday afternoon. Callahan did not offer an opinion on Sloan, and I did not ask for one. I thanked him and ended the call as I turned onto Greenwich Avenue. The office building was a 12-story glass and granite structure on a street where the maples had mostly let go of their leaves, leaving the sidewalk with that particular combination of color and cold that belongs specifically to New England in the second week of October. I had driven this street more mornings than I could count. I had parked in this garage for 30 years. I walked through the lobby and past the security desk, where a man named Gerald, who had worked the morning shift for the past 8 years, said, "Good morning, Mrs. Marlowe," the way he said it every morning, and I said good morning back the way I always did. The elevator took me to the 12th floor. The hallway was quiet. It was 8:07, which was early enough that most of the floor had not yet arrived. I walked to the end of the corridor to the door with my name on the frame, and I pushed it open. Cora Blaine was at her station. She was at her station. Her monitor lit a cup of coffee, already cooling on the edge of the desk closest to my door, with a notepad beside it, listing 3 calls that had come in since 6:30 that morning, all of them I understood at a glance from journalists. She looked up when I walked in. She did not say anything about the night before. She did not comment on the events she had witnessed and contributed to. She picked up the notepad, rose from her chair, and held it out to me in the manner of a woman who considers her function to be the management of what comes next. "Good morning, Mrs. Marlowe," she said. "You have 3 messages. The board has requested a briefing call at 10, and Mr. Pruitt has already filed the resolutions with the county." I took the notepad. "Thank you, Cora," I said. I looked at my office door, which was open the way it always was in the morning. Let us get to work. What I know now, after everything, is this betrayal in marriage does not arrive loudly. It arrives quietly in small adjustments you explain away until you no longer can. Do not do what I did. Do not wait until the evidence is impossible to ignore. Trust what you already know. I have asked God to handle the forgiveness. That is between me and Him. What I chose to handle myself was the truth. And at 60 years old, after 35 years of building something that was always mine, I refused to let one man's greed and cowardice become the ending of my story. My opinion, for what it is worth, a woman who has built her own life does not lose it simply because someone tries to take it. She prepares, she documents, and when the moment comes, she stands up. If this story of betrayal, toxic marriage, and hard-won justice stayed with you, leave a comment below. Tell me where you are watching from. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you believe truth is always worth the cost. Thank you for watching until the very end. It means everything. A note, some stories on this channel include dramatized elements for educational purposes. If that is not for you, no hard feelings. For those who stay, the next story is coming.